Hey everybody, my name is Jacob Shapiro. I'm the co-owner and manager at Fantom Comics in Washington, D.C. I am pleased to host Washington, D.C.'s own Shawn Martinbrough for the trade release of Red Hood the Hill. Can I get a round of applause, please? You show us so much love. We're really happy with you. And you came by when issue 1 of this came out, and now it's done. How do you feel now compared to then?
It's weird when you work as a comic book creator. A lot of times, by the time the product comes out, you're already like way on to something else. So you kind of have to rewind and remind yourself, oh, that's right, okay. But I'm happy. It was a labor of love, and it all started from a 2-part fill-in issue that I was invited to write, and then it spawned this bigger story. So I'm just really, really proud of it. I'm really proud of it. I think we had so many like talented people. You know, we had shout out to Sanford Green on the interiors, Tony Akins, Stefano Gaudiano who did the inks, Matt Herms who did the colors, and we had so many amazing covers, you know, by so many great artists. So yeah, I'm just pretty happy.
I mean, for trade releases, I guess in the long run, more people are going to read it in this format than in the single issues, right?
Probably.
I'm guessing that you knew this was going to be a miniseries when you started it? Or did you? I mean, are you thinking of it as the completed trade when you're writing it?
Yeah, well, the first 2 issues were pretty much a compact story, but I left the threads there for it to be picked up. So when they were interested in doing a 6-part follow-up, I really just followed the threads that I'd left in that first 2 parts. And then, even at the end of all of the issues, there's still threads there that we can continue on. So we'll see, but I'm really pretty happy, and I'm very curious to see how people receive the story all collected, all put together, versus single issues, because I think it's pretty, it ties well. There are a lot of little things that sort of tie together over the course of all of the issues.
So what attracts you to Jason Todd and Red Hood as a character to write?
I didn't know too much about the Red Hood when they first invited me to do it. I had to do some research, and I'm like, oh wait, this is the Robin that was killed back in like the 80s, and with the cool Mike Mignola cover, and I was like, oh, it's that guy, that Robin. And then I was like, oh wow, that happened to him, and then he got killed in the Lazarus Pit and came back angry, and now he's killing people. And I started watching the animated cartoons, and I was reading some of the issues, and so I was like, okay, he's a pretty interesting character. But since it was initially like a fill-in issue, like I couldn't make any major changes with the character because they were going right, because the original 2-part story fit in between Joker War and Future State. So they had plans for the Jason Todd character. So the most I can do is kind of like expose him to something. And so he's really kind of observing what's going on around him, and then maybe hint at a little bit of growth or a little bit of thawing between his relationship between him and Bruce Wayne, aka Batman. And then I just really kind of built on that, more in the 6-part series. But Jason Todd's really cool, but it was really fun giving him this supporting cast and kind of like a family dynamic, which he didn't really have before. It was great giving him like a really a close friend in Dana, and because I hadn't seen that dynamic with him before. And also it was really fun writing him butting heads with Batman as they're trying to sort of figure out what's going on, and also how Batman gets pulled into this because he hasn't been engaged in the Hill. And so he's kind of like, wait, what's going on? Who? What? All right, maybe I might need to look at this. So.
Well, this book's called Red Hood. It's also called The Hill. Let's talk about The Hill a little bit.
Okay.
Because The Hill is your creation?
Yes.
This is a suburb of Gotham, which is interesting to me to even think about, like, what do the suburbs of Gotham look like? Because Gotham can feel like such an all-encompassing thing in the world of Batman that, has got me thinking about, urban planning and stuff. Could you talk about the genesis of The Hill and how you see suburban sprawl in the Batverse?
Well, so the original Hill was co-created by me and the writer Christopher Priest, and it was a one-shot that came out in 1999, and it was this section of Gotham that Batman never went to. It was very dangerous. It was very downtrodden, and that was the whole premise of what Christopher Priest was trying to do in that story. And so I just thought when they asked me to come back and write like a 2-part series for Red Hood, I don't believe in leaving any ideas behind. So I'm like, since I created the Hill, and as far as I know, it's never been touched on, let me go back and revisit it. And how would the Hill be different 20 years later? Like in any any city, you have your rundown areas, but that's just prime real estate. So, it's eventually someone's going to say, well, if we improve the services and if we clean this up, we can make a lot of money. And then all of a sudden new people will move in and it's a brand new neighborhood that they slap a new name on. And I thought that could be a very interesting backstory for the Hill and how it's changed. So when we revisit the Hill 20 something years later, we, along with Jason, are experiencing this new neighborhood because Jason hasn't been there in so long. And so it's like, oh wow, this is different. And of course you're gonna have different fat people butting heads within that neighborhood. And I didn't want to make it seem like, oh, okay, all these new people who move into a new neighborhood that's been gentrified are bad. It's like, no, you just get along with the people who are there. So I thought that those are really interesting, grounded elements to bring into the story and reintroduce people to them.
Yeah, could you talk a little bit about the extended cast? I guess including Batman. How did you I guess when DC came to you with this story, did they just say you want to write a story about Red Hood in the Hill, or how do you decide who's going to be in this book?
As the writer, it was completely up to me. They were just like, can you give us a 2-part Red Hood story that has some crime element to it? And so I said, I thought about, okay, let me bring us back to the Hill. Let's reintroduce the Hill. And I've said before that I approached the first 2 parts of the Hill like a Western. And usually the structure of a Western is that the cowboy rides into a town and he gets caught up in beef in the town. And that's how I approached that story. So Jason returns to the hood, and then not the hood, the Hill. and there's a conflict going on in the Hill. And I tied this into the previous storyline, which was the Joker War, which was like the Purge and all these people dressed like Joker going around terrorizing Gotham. And I figured, all right, well, what if you lived in a neighborhood and you knew this Joker War was coming? Like, what would you do? Would you get together with your neighbors and kind of circle the wagons and protect what's yours, which is also building on the whole Western dynamic. And then I was like, okay, well, what if you have people, like regular people that could fight against this threat? And so I teased it in the first 2-part story, but then I built on it more because I had it where there are various people that have moved to the Hill over time. And there is a woman named Miss Asha who I suggest, and then I kind of suggest even more in the rest of the story, that she was a former member of the League of Shadows. And she has left the League of Shadows, but she is relocated in the Hill. And when she saw this threat coming, which was the Joker War that was going to probably affect the Hill, she took a bunch of those Hill residents and trained them in how to defend themselves. And that's how you can get people that can like run around and do various things and fight and all that stuff. And I thought that was an interesting way. And then she was kind of weaponizing these people because she really wasn't that discerning on who she was training. Because if I came to you and said, hey, listen, I got a store and I really care about this, can you help me or whatever? And she's like, okay, I'll teach you some stuff. Well, what if you were a gangster and you're like, you know what, that can kind of help me with my hustle. So, hey, listen, I need help, can you train me? So not only did she train well-intentioned civilians, she trained some criminal elements as well. And I thought that was like an interesting conflict where it's like, listen, you're just weaponizing people. It's like giving guns out to people, not saying, what do you plan on doing with this? And I thought that was a very interesting kind of like subtext and backstory with the Hill. And then, but going to your original question, like how do you populate the cast of the Hill around Jason Todd? Gotham City is all about duality, so that's why I thought, let me come up with the twin sisters, Dana and Denise Harlow, that have different viewpoints. Dana is a small business owner. She's a small business owner by day, and she patrols the Hill and protects it against the criminal element at night. Her sister is a journalist, and she is very kind of straightforward, reporting the news and follow the rules kind of thing. And I thought that was kind of interesting dynamic. And then I just had like other people that would be in the Hill, and I was like, all right, well, what haven't we seen before? I'm like, well, what if you had this guy that had a tie to the original bad guy who in the original Hill story, which was Demetrius Corley Jr., and the original villain was his father, Demetrius Corley. And I was like, well, what if in this new story his son is now involved in a criminal element, but in a less direct way, in a less obvious way? And I thought that could be very kind of interesting. And he had his old crew of you know, his whole gang, that he's sort of making moves and you're not really sure what he's trying to do until you get deeper in the story. But it's really just putting all of these different characters with different motivations, and then eventually these motivations are going to, you know, butt heads, and that's how you get conflict. And Jason Todd's in the middle of it, and then he's trying to figure out what's going on, and then ultimately it gets on Batman's radar, and that's, to me, like, you just keep building the conflict, and that's how I think how you create an interesting story.
It's interesting to hear you talk about, you know, Gotham as having two identities, because I love stories where the location is important, you know, and the place it takes place in is a character in and of itself. And I think lots of people who've written Batman books think, you know, feel that way about Gotham. I think, you know, especially given current political climate, I think a lot of times I feel like the way that Gotham is depicted, it kind of reminds me of how a lot of politicians depict like urban areas in general, of like, these are all just hellholes full of terrible stuff happening all the time. But then your response to that is characters who are focused on community building. I think that's kind of poetic in a way. But I want to touch on earlier when you were first talking about DC approaching you to do this book, that they wanted you to do it in the style of a crime thriller. And I recently went back and ordered your 2007 How to Draw Noir Comics book, available at Fantom Comics now.
Signed.
So, you know, outside of superhero comics, you're kind of, crime noir is sort of your meat and potatoes. You've done, you know, Hellboy. Hellboy's crime noir adjacent, but it is arguably also a superhero comic. Mm-hmm. Could you talk about, you know, do you think of yourself as a noir writer, and where, is that, and the DNA shows up pretty obviously in this book.
Yeah, I think I definitely am drawn to the noir style. Like, I love noir movies. Like, one of the things I recently just caught up on was Ripley on Netflix, which is, if anyone has not seen it, it is absolutely gorgeous. It is stunning. It is every piece, every frame is just like art, and it's just well written, because I'm a big fan of the director Steve Zalian, his writing, but it's just gorgeous. But stuff like that just really, I love that. So if I think about all the books that I read growing up, and I've been a fan of so many different types of comics, but the ones I tended to gravitate in terms of the style were driven by artists that had a more noir influenced style, like David Mazzucchelli or Frank Miller or Mike Mignola, Bill Sienkiewicz, you know, and so Alex Toth. So I feel like when I write, I'm not particularly writing to say, okay, this is noir, but I like crime. I like, you know, crime stories and people that have hidden agendas and misdirection. And so I feel like that is something that's a consistent thread you can see. And now that I'm writing as well as drawing, I think you can see it in the Red Hood the Hill. Like right now I'm finishing up a graphic novel for Abrams, which is a crime noir with a jazz theme that I've been doing for Abrams, and I'm finishing that up, and that is going to be pure. That's like, you know, if you thought that this was noir, that is going to be probably I'm never going to get out of that genre label of being a noir artist. But it's fun. I think the thing about noir is that it's the drama. It's the drama that I find really interesting. And even if it's not something that I'm illustrating, I feel like you see the drama in Red Hood the Hill. You know, there are moments there that, you know, I was very specific in working with the artist and saying, okay, it should look like this. And I don't want to step on artists' toes. I love collaborating. So it's great when you write something and then you see how someone else is going to visually tell that story. So I love that. So the things that Sanford Green did, and Tony Akins, the way they would, you know, the way he would tell a story, I love it. So it's just to me a very interesting genre to play in.
Yeah. So you're doing a noir comic for Abrams. Abrams is a book publisher. Can you talk about your experience doing a graphic novel for a book publisher versus doing a comic for a comics publisher?
It's just more of a long format. Like the book that I'm doing for Abrams, it's called The Heavy, and it's 155 pages. So it's just, you know, that would be like maybe a little bit more than 6 issues, or a little bit more than 6 issues if you do an average 20-issue book. But it's fun. Like, they pretty much gave me free. I mean, it was something that I created, so I had the freedom to create the story. So I was like, okay, well, let me see, let me kind of make this kind of cool. So like part of the story is set in New York City, which I'm from originally, even though I've been down in DC for like a long time, and goes from New York to Paris, back to New York. It's contemporary, but I feel like when you read it, it doesn't really feel like it's locked into any particular time period, which is pretty cool. It's got a jazz theme to it because I'm a fan of jazz music, although I'm not someone who can name. I just like the vibe of jazz. And it's just populated with so many different types of characters, and I just like writing characters that have an interesting perspective, but again, they have a different motivation than this person, then you get that conflict, and that's where it's really great. So yeah, I'm finishing that up, and I'm working with John Workman, who is a veteran letterer.
Oh, yeah.
And it's amazing to work with John because I grew up reading John's work on Thor, and so to have him lettering my words and my script, and then he's like the sweetest guy. He'll be like, Shawn, this is amazing. I love this page. It reminds me of blah 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 blah. And I'm just like, that's John Workman. That's crazy. That's crazy. So and then Christopher Sotomayor, a longtime friend, and he's doing spot red color. So it'll be like Sin City. It'll be printed in black and white with touches of red here and there. So I'm really excited about that, and hopefully I'll be finished with that in like another couple of months, and then it'll be out 2026.
Sweet. And I guess just to be clear, you are writing?
I'm writing and drawing
and drawing it?
And drawing that.
So, I mean, Red Hood the Hill is a project where you're the writer. Now that this project is behind you, could you talk about, I mean, because you cut your teeth as an artist, but it seems like in mainstream American comics that, like, if you really want to move up in the world, you gotta start writing. Chip Zdarsky's writing Batman. He started off drawing sex criminals. So I mean, now that you've done this, I mean, how do you? I mean, would you do it again? Are you just clamoring to get back to writing and drawing yourself?
Well, it's interesting because 2/3 of the projects now, well, actually, half of the projects that I'm working on now, I'm writing, and I'm working with other artists, and then the other half, I'm illustrating, I'm drawing. So I've always wanted to write, and I've always written stories, but I made the jump to become a professional writer, a few years back, and I'm like, okay, because I've been working with some of the best writers in the industry, so it's like getting a free class in writing, and so I know how to break down a story, break down a script, pacing. I noticed pacing, and I looked at all that, and I'm like, okay, I'm ready, and I can do this. And I think that being an artist gives me a unique advantage to telling a story as a writer, because I feel like I think especially when you're doing something like graphic novels and comics, you have to know, it's a very interesting approach to know what to show and what to say. You don't always have to say everything, and I think a lot of times writers overwrite because they feel like they have to spell everything out. But if you're an artist, well, that would be better if you saw that versus to read it, or vice versa. And that I really love about the writing process. So I love when I write a script and I'll give it to an artist, and they'll come back with the page drawn out, and I'm like, oh my god, okay, I was specific in my direction, but it's still great to see how they'll tell that story, and I love it. And I'm like, okay, I guess this is how writers felt all these years when I would give in a page of their scripts visualized. And it's just, and I love collaborating. I'm writing a series for Image now. It's a 6-part series. I say it's like my Star Wars, and I'm working with an amazing artist, Italian artist, Alberto Pagliaro, and his imagination is insane. His style is completely different than mine, but when he'll send in some layouts for me to like check out, and I'm like, my god, like I'm like, this is amazing. And like the design of that creature, I wouldn't even have thought about that, but to see his thinking and to see what an artist would bring to it, a different artist would bring to it, I love it. So I really, I plan to keep writing certain projects, drawing and writing certain other projects, and sometimes just drawing other projects.
Yeah. As an artist who writes, do you do thumbnails when you're the writer?
Totally. Well, no. Not, if I'm the writer, I don't. Okay. I think I try to be specific, not Alan Moore specific in terms of my scripts. I'm not doing that, but I'll just be very specific about page 1, Shawn is doing an interview with Jacob, wide shot. Panel 2, Shawn over Jacob's shoulder, Shawn stalking. Flip over Shawn's shoulder, Jacob, 2 shot, then reveal to show the audience. So I know what needs to be in a scene per page, so I'll write it like that. And then sometimes if the artist wants to change an angle or whatever, that's cool, you know. But if it's something that's really specific, and I'm like, I need you to draw it this way because that's going to help tell the story. And if you don't draw that, that'll mess up something down the road. Then I'll say, hey, can we follow the script? But yeah, did I answer your question?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, the answer is no. You're not.
No, I'm not doing that. No, no. You know, but it is interesting with Alberto. There is a language barrier because he's Italian, so he does not speak English. But I'm sure his English is better than my Italian. So sometimes there's a language barrier, and so what he'll do is he'll send me a layout of a page that I've scripted, and I'll be like, okay, can we adjust this? And sometimes it just doesn't quite. I'll send him a note. He's not quite getting it, or I'm not being clear enough, and then I'll just stop and I'll just do like a loose thumbnail and say, this is what I was thinking about. And then, you know, that works. But typically I try not to be a ball buster like that and micromanage what an artist does.
How did you two get together?
Well, Alberto and I met through a mutual friend. I have to give a shout out to Alessio Dinesi, who is an amazing editor based in Rome. And I met Alessio when I was working on Thief of Thieves, and he edited the Italian edition of Thief of Thieves. Mm-hmm. And they had flown me out there to attend a convention, and I got to hang out with him. He's a great guy. And so when I needed an artist for this image project, I said, Alessio, you know anybody out there that's good? Mm-hmm. And he was like, oh, yeah, let me give you a couple of guys. I'm like, oh my God, this guy's freaking amazing. And so Alessio connected me with Alberto, and he actually connected me with another artist because I have another project that I've co-written. It's coming out through First Second Books, and I'm doing that with. I co-wrote that with Joe Illich, who is a comic industry mainstay, and I was originally supposed to draw it as well as co-write it, but then that happened around the time Robert Kirkman reached out to me to work with him on Thief of Thieves, and I'm like, I can't do both, so I got to do Thief of Thieves. And so we found an artist, but then that didn't work out. The project stalled, and then finally I was like, you know, this is a great story because it was a crime love story set in the Harlem Renaissance. But it was really going to require someone who could do backgrounds and real good storytelling. And so I hit up Alessio. I'm like, Alessio, do you know anybody? He's like, oh, I got a guy. And he introduced me to Riccardo Colissimo. And he is freaking insane. And when I saw his samples, I'm like, oh my God, if we can get this guy, hell yeah. And so First Second, we locked him in, and he's been working on this for like a couple of years now. So I think it's supposed to come out in 2027, but his stuff is just boom. It's just when I get an email when I wake up, because you know Italy is ahead of us time wise. But when I wake up and I get an email from him with art, and I look at that, I'm like, oh my God! It's like this guy is just hardcore. It's just such beautiful work, and that's what really jazzes me. So yeah, that's what I'm doing.
Yeah, well, you know, Italy and France got their own long history of comics. Do you feel like working with an Italian artist, is he coming at it from like a Euro comic perspective, and so that has to affect the way that he does layouts and things like that, right?
Well, I feel like Europeans, Asians, South Americans, they tend to come at art from they're coming at this from like a different artistic level. I mean, in terms of like just the foundation of drawing, like they really take that seriously, where I feel like sometimes American artists tend to kind of stylize and copy an American artist, and like the storytelling might not be good, or the artwork might, like the anatomy might not be, you know, on point. But I find that with a lot of like European, Asian, South Asian, and South American artists, like you could tell that they went to art school and they have real art training behind it, because I'm just like, damn, that's really good. And you look at how many South American artists are working for DC Comics. They're killing it. Like, you know, like I didn't know who Dan Mora was when they asked him to do like the covers for the first 2-part story. And I'm like, who the hell's Dan Mora? I was like, can we get like somebody? I was throwing out like, like some American artist. And when Dan gave in like the freaking that first cover with, I was just like, oh my God, this guy's amazing. And then when he did the second cover, I'm like, oh my God. So when it came time for us to do the 6-part sequel, I'm like, can we get Dan back to do a couple of covers? But now he's blowing up. Like Dan is like doing everything. But I was like, but I actually sent Dan an email, said, hey, listen, Dan, is there any way you could do like covers for like this? He's like, oh yeah, they already contacted me, I'd love to, and here, I did 2 of them. So, so it actually blew up his covers. I went to Staples and made like poster size of like the first two covers of Red Hood 51 and 52, and I just marvel at those.
Yeah, we did a book club a few months back where we got Dan Moore to Zoom call in from Costa Rica.
Oh wow!
And it was, I mean, it's funny because then in a way, even though he's like the hot artist at DC right now, you could tell that he feels a bit disconnected from all of it because he's just chilling in Costa Rica.
Wow.
Which I think is kind of the best of both worlds, to be honest. 'Cause, you know, he can fly out for the conventions or whatever, and then just go back home to Costa Rica.
Well, I mean, like that's the artist lifestyle. Like I did an interview earlier today, like I mentioned earlier, and this camera crew came to my to my apartment / studio, and they were like, "Yeah, so tell us about your process." And I was like, "Listen, I have this very tough commute in the morning. I walk from my bedroom to my art room, and when it's snowy and cold outside, it's like, you know, it's really, really tough. And you spend all day working, you know, in your studio. And for me, I'll take breaks to go to the gym because you got to balance that out when you just sit on your butt all day. Or I'll take like a biking break. But I usually will work up until like 1 o'clock in the morning, and that's when I kind of stop because if I feel myself getting sleepy and I'm drawing, I don't want to screw something up, so I'll stop. But sometimes if you're really in a creative zone, I can go to like maybe 3 a.m. and then you just go to bed and then you kind of start all over again, and that's kind of like your existence. And we don't get out until we have a chance to do a signing and we get to meet, you know, great folks like yourselves, and we get to see like what people think about your work, you know, and that's when it's like, oh wow, people actually dig this stuff, cool, you know. And I totally get, you know, like Dan just kind of popping up, doing a Zoom, and then going back home, and and then getting back to work.
Yeah. We've been chatting for a bit. I want to give people a chance to ask questions in the audience as well. My one last major question I had is, well, that's a lie. I got two.
Okay, go ahead.
Something that I always think about is, you know, first of all, you know, it's tough that you can't really get rich off comics unless there's a movie or TV show made out of your thing. But interconnected to that is the fact that when people talk about comics, talk about layouts, talk about composition, so much of the language is borrowed from cinema. And, you know, so often you hear people talk about the cinematic, you know, pages and things like that. And it kind of, as a comics person, it hurts my soul a little bit for like one art form to sort of exist, you know, so kind of reliant on another art form. So like you know, and I mean, I love movies too, and a lot of times, you know, those are my reference points as well. But I mean, especially for crime noir, which I feel like, you know, has a huge film history and a big comics history. I mean, do you think that comics has its own, I mean, way of talking about it? That, like, could you not make any movie references, like film references at all, when you're trying to break down, you know, angles and stuff like that, or is it just intrinsic to the medium?
Oh yeah, no, I don't. I think that they're definitely interconnected, because you have certain comics that, well, yeah, they might have a film sense, but I don't think that when I look at Batman Year One, David Mazzucchelli was like channeling a specific film. Like he might have been, and I don't think that I feel like, for me, listen, I'm a huge film buff. I really like, I can watch a favorite movie like over and over, the way people will like a favorite song, like over and over again. I can see, and I just know certain movies like the back of my hand. But I'm also informed by going to the museum and looking at works of art. Like I have a degree in illustration, and when you go to an art school, like you are trained to go to museums and go look at different forms of art. So yes, I can say that, yeah, maybe this might have been influenced by a film or a TV here, but it's just as informed by other art, you know? So I don't really feel like comics are reliant on movies for like their storytelling, because there's certain things that you can do in a comic that you can't do in film, and vice versa. You know what I mean? So, and there's a certain power to be able to create one image or a sequence of images that have such an impact versus a film where it's constantly moving. It's frames. So yeah, I think they both, you know, coexist, and I don't think that one is beholden to another. I mean, of course, one sells more, so people see more film. More people will see a film than buy a comic book. But I feel like a lot of times those people that made that film read comics. So who's influencing who? You know, I know that, like, I've been floored with, I've met people that make movies and TV that'll say, "Oh, you did that? I'm a huge fan of that." I'm like, "Really?" really? Like you saw that and that inspired you, and that just shows how art inspires art and creativity inspires creativity.
Yeah, I mean, it makes me think though about how a lot of times when artists draw Tony Stark now, they're drawing Robert Downey Jr.
Sure, yeah.
I mean, are you thinking about Robert Pattinson when you're drawing Batman?
Not at all. Not at all. Not at all.
Well, semi-related. My my last question before we I'll end the stream and open up to the audience is, why do you think that Batman films have struggled to feature Robin at all, or like any of the Bat family? Because Batman is an interesting character because on one hand, I work alone, but also you learn that the Bat, not just the Robins, but the Batgirl, like the whole Bat family. A lot of times, Batman is the least interesting part of Batman.
Yeah.
So like, why why do you think they have never cracked that when it comes to their live action movies?
All right, that's an interesting question. And if I were to probably say, it's because they're mostly focused on figuring out this guy who is wealthy by day and dresses up as a bat. And I feel like that explaining that mentality tends to sort of dominate whatever the movie is. And so to squeeze in a sidekick, and honestly, reading the Mark Waid, Chris Samnee, Batman and Robin Year One,
yeah.
I'm like loving that. And that's a total blueprint on how to do it. But I feel like sometimes when some of the directors have taken on Batman, they're kind of afraid to totally commit to the craziness and the wackiness of the Batman universe. And that's something that I tried to do in Red Hood the Hill with that character Lenny Kreck, which in the middle of the story is like this weird kind of Twilight Zone type horror detour to this wacky character. And I did that because number one, Sanford was like, hey, I'd like to draw something like, I'd like to do something horror related to this. But I was also like, Gotham is a weird city where there's weird shit happening. So why not throw someone in there that's just weird, that's kind of off and kind of crazy. And so I feel like and I love the Christopher Nolan movies, but clearly those are grounded. Like he's not doing Killer Croc, he's not doing Captain Dr. Mr. Freeze or whatever. He's doing more grounded takes, and I love it.
Have we seen the giant penny in any of the live action movies?
No. No.
Didn't Nolan start to introduce a Robin character though?
Yeah.
Well, they hinted at the end of one of the movies, and then it never led anywhere.
I was so disappointed.
I mean, and it was Joseph Gordon-Levitt, who's
Yeah,
like
he
playing
looks
people
like-
like that guy.
Yeah, he looked
it
like
could
he
have
did a
easily
good
been
job.
him.
It could have worked, but he was done. That he had done 10 years making those 3 films.
Right. I mean, but you don't have to talk about Batman's parents dying in every single movie, right? Like at a certain point, it's like people. It's in the zeitgeist. Like you assume that the majority of people watching a Batman movie know that his parents were killed. Right?
See, and I think this is the the challenge that studios like Marvel and DC have now, is that the audience, we've had like 30 really strong films that have told this superhero story the same kind of way. You can't start out a superhero movie now in 2025 with the origin story again, because we're sophisticated, and definitely you can't do that again with a character that we know.
Yeah.
So James Gunn skipping over the Krypton thing, that's great. I think that's
smart.
It's smart because we know it. If you want to touch on that in a flashback, cool, but get to the new stuff. And so, yeah, I think that, and with the Robert Pattinson Batman, he was already Batman.
Yeah.
So that makes sense. We already know this, so skip to it. So
He was already Batman, but they still don't do a Robin.
Yep.
well, because they had to introduce Robert Pattinson first, because we had to say, well, who's this new guy playing Batman? Who's this new world? Let's see if they do a sidekick. I don't know. But then again, you can't have the young boy with the tights and the green underwear. Like that's kind of, how you gonna do that? I don't know. I mean, I don't know.
It's just, I mean, it's sad to me because not only Red Hood, but like Nightwing is also like such a great character, and you're never gonna get to Nightwing until you do Robin first, right?
Well,
so are we just never gonna get
Do
there?
him as a flashback.
Oh yeah.
Skip ahead.
Oh yeah. No. Oh yeah. I killed Robin, but you never saw him. He was there. You just gotta trust that eventually we'll get there.
Yeah.
Psych. That whole universe, it doesn't exist anymore. So
Yeah.
catch you next time.
On that note, before I close the stream, what's the next big thing you got coming out that you want to plug to people?
Okay, well, all right, so I already mentioned my creator-owned project for Abrams, and the thing that I'm working on, I'm hard at work now, is a Hellboy 4-part story.
Hey!
With that Italian artist, Alberto Pagliaro, that I mentioned, that we're
sir.
working on the sci-fi thing. So we're like halfway done with our sci-fi thing for Image. We're going to take a pause, and then we're going to do the Hellboy thing. And it's really, really cool. It's Hellboy set in Italy. Yeah,
that's cool.
and it's in
That's
like
cool.
the 70s, and it's really fun playing in the Mike Mignola Hellboy universe and writing Hellboy, because Hellboy to me is a funny freaking, he's like a blue collar guy that experiences this crazy shit, but he's like, what's that? What? Get out of here. Stop it. Beat it. Like, it's just, and so I gave him the first script, I gave him the whole outline, and which they approved, and I just gave him the first script, and they came back and they were like, they gave a couple of notes, but they were like, we love it. So I'm like, so now I'm working on scripting the second part. So yeah, I'm hard at work on Hellboy in Italy.
That's very. Is that the title?
No, that's not. No. That's it. But that's the gist of it. It's Hellboy in Sicily.
Yeah, Hellboy in Mexico, which I think is Richard Corbin doing the art. One of my all-time favorites.
Oh. This was really cool because I actually visited Sicily last year. I was tagging along with my girlfriend. She had a conference in Europe, and when I told her about the Hellboy thing and how it got approved, she surprised me. She said, well, you know what? Since we're going to be over there, why don't we go to Sicily for like a couple of days so you can get some reference shots? And so it was an amazing 4 days where we were just going around, and I took tons of reference shots. And Alberto lives in Florence. So, but he was like, oh, let's do Sicily. Let's involve the volcano. And I want to do Greek architecture. And so I said, okay, let me see what I can do. So it's pretty fun. So yeah, I'm pretty psyched about that.
Yeah, that's really exciting, and it'll be interesting to see if then once you do the Hellboy book, if you're able to get some of those readers to then jump over to your creator-owned book too.
That's the plan.
Yeah.
And actually, one other project that we're kind of still trying to seal the deal on, but it's just looking pretty close. It's something for something in the manga space. That I'm co-writing, and the artist, he's not a manga artist, but it would be in that kind of a format, and it's for not one of the big two, but it's pretty cool. And so yeah, I'm looking forward. Hopefully, if we seal that deal, we can get cracking on it, and the artist is going to start possibly in August.
Yeah. Okay. That's very cool. Well, we're going to close the stream now before we get to questions and signing. So for now, can we give a round of applause to Shawn Martinbrough? Thank you so much for joining us. People watching on the internet, we'll see you next time. Wah, wah, wah.